Chapter 21. It wasn't as chilly as it had been. I was glad because we'd probably be spending most of the morning and afternoon outside. I was still sleepy. I probably would have overslept, but the sound of a chicken crowing had raised me up early. I guess that skinny red chicken was still running around St. Nick's somewhere. His crowing at the break of dawn had woke Ma up too. Like most Saturdays, she would be working the whole day in Brooklyn. I liked this because with her being gone all Saturday, I could usually do whatever I wanted without her telling me not to. Her days at work was my day to be free, explore. Someone groaned behind me. I turned to watch this Spanish dude stand near a wall with his knee bent, staring off into space. Every now and then, he would act like he would need to sit down. Then he would just stay standing, dazed. He was in his world, built out of drugs. Who knew how long he'd been there like that, not knowing who he was? I was on the corner of 125th and Lexington in Harlem. This place had to be the most psycho corner of all of New York City. It had to be. Daddy Rajpal told me that the reason this corner was so nuts that all different types of people met here. Added to the ex-cons living in the halfway houses around the way, there were the addicts who used the drug clinics nearby. Also, there were the city buses that stopped at this corner to take people to homeless shelters. So all these unlucky people mixed up together is what made this place kind of funky. "Yo, young blood," somebody called. "I'm talking to you, brother." I met eyes with this old dude wearing only a stained blue windbreaker. Yeah, it was a warmer day today than it had been, but not warm enough to just be wearing an old dirty windbreaker. It must have been about 40 degrees. "What's up?" I said to the dude. My eyes started scanning the crowd of people rushing past. Most of them were racing down in subway station trying to get somewhere else. "Spare a dollar?" Windbreaker asked me. "I'm trying to buy a coffee." I handed him the change in my pocket with, "That's all I got." "Youngblood, God bless you," he mumbled, then bowed and skidded off. Again, I peeped at the time on my phone. It was way past 10 a.m. I was getting tired of waiting. I stashed my phone in the back pocket of my jeans. "Youngblood," somebody called out. For a second, I thought it was old Windbreaker back for more coffee money, but after thinking for that second, my brain realized it couldn't have been him back. This new voice was different, young. I turned towards the voice, and the heavy stone plopped right back onto my heart. I was staring that dude Harp right in the face, one of the older boys who'd been following me since Christmas Eve. I didn't say nothing but turned to run. Goalie was standing right in my way, though, out of nowhere. He mean-mugged me, then glanced at all the people around us. "Come here, little man," Goalie said to me, almost whispering. His stank breath was all up in my face. He had had an egg sandwich for breakfast. I could tell. The two boys grabbed an arm each and toted me around the corner to 124th Street. I started kicking. There weren't as many people here, almost nobody this Saturday morning. "You look scared, little man," Goalie told me. He shoved me over to Harp, who grabbed me by my backpack before I could take off. "What's your name?" I didn't say nothing. "We know who you is, Lollipop," Harper said into my ear. He made a popping sound with his lips. "You hang with them Dominicans over in St. Nick. What you doing over on the east side this morning?" "On 125th, Goalie said. "He a quiet little mouse," Harp said. Goalie cracked a smile. "You wander down to this part of East 125th, you gotta pay the fare, Lollipop," he said. "You know the rules." He stepped closer. "Give me that phone." I didn't move, and Goalie's eyes got all narrow. He wasn't mad. It seemed like he wasn't sure if I had understood. "The phone in your back pocket," Goalie said. "Harper and me could just grab it, but we want you to give it to us as a gift. We don't want there to be no misunderstanding about it. It's just like you giving us your phone because we're really, really tight. Best friends," Harp whispered. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. I knew they was going to have my phone. That wasn't really what made me sizzle. The sad, angry thing was that there was nothing I could do to stop them. There were two of them. They were both bigger. Like Ma always said, I had skinny boy muscles. Goalie stuck his finger in my face. Give it up, lollipop. I turned away. I saw Big Rose stomp around the corner. Lips tucked. She was skipping in that way she always did, real fast, so that her big head bopped into the air every time she took a step, and with both hands she was clutching a plastic lunchbox against her chest. I heard her say, "When you die, they bury you." Looking confused, Harp glanced at her. Rose was moving so fast toward me and the boys that I didn't even have time to warn her to hold back. I didn't want her to get hurt. Right after that thought flew through my brain cells, I watched Rose raise her lunchbox above her head and then blop. She had whopped Gully so hard in the back of his head that her lunchbox broke in two. Food went flying out. Goalie stumbled forward onto me, drooling, and we both tumbled to the cement. I scraped my hand, trying to keep from falling. By the time I looked up at Rose and Harp, I saw him ducking away from her, trying to get some distance between his head and her heavy fists. She was pummeling Harp's head like a jackhammer breaking concrete. One first after another fist flew out and landed on Harp's head, eye, nose, or neck before he had any chance to react. Not only was Big Rose taller than both Harp and Goalie, but she carried more weight on her than those boys, who were probably 2 years older. I jumped up and lunged towards Harp. Leaving his friend Goalie still dazed on the sidewalk, Harp took off running east on 124th Street. Rose threw her red delicious apple after him as he ran. It just missed his head. Both of us turned to glare down Goalie, who was trying to stand. Before I could say anything, Rose ran at him with hard metal thermos that had also been flung out of her broken lunchbox. She didn't smack him with it, but stood there, waiting. Goalie stumbled backward, out of her reach. His eyes narrowed again, just like they'd narrowed at me before, right after I'd refused to hand him my phone. He looked like he didn't understand how this happened to him, how this girl had smashed out him and his roughneck partner. For a second, I thought he'd forgot how to speak, until he unloaded the longest stretch of curse words at Rose that I'd ever heard anybody gush out. Rose let out a scream and raised her thermos higher above her head, like she was about to dunk it against Goalie's brains. Still cursing, Goalie tore off in the opposite direction. When Rose tried to follow, I was able to hold her back. After she finished puffing, we picked up what was left of her lunch off the street and made it back to the subway at 125th and Lex. The McDonald's restaurant we went to in Midtown Manhattan for lunch was so crowded, we had to locate a corner booth on the second floor upstairs. I was glad because from the second floor you could watch all the people racing and rushing down below. Rose wasn't tired, but I was. We had spent most of the afternoon hunting all around Midtown for famous buildings that were in my architect's book. I treated Rose to lunch, and all she had wanted was chicken nuggets and apple slices. I guess it was my fault that she had to wreck her own lunch by pounding Goalie upside his ugly head with it. "That boy pointed in your face," she told me. "He shouldn't do that." I decided to never stick my finger in her face. This Rose was okay, I thought. We both sat up there, eating and looking out. I took a chew of my double cheeseburger and reached for my phone. I had bagged pictures of all the different buildings Rose and me had spotted. "Here's the Chippendale building," I said, showing her. "That was the first one we found, designed by Philip Johnson and John Burge." She nodded and spoke with mashed up chicken in her mouth. 55th and Madison. I thumbed a page in my book. "It says it's nicknamed the Chippendale Building because it looks like a piece of furniture, huh?" "What?" Rose asked. "That's what it says. The top of the building is built like the top of an old cabinet." We went on like that for a little while, eating and talking about what we'd seen that day. My favorite was the Chrysler Building. To me, it was a building from another planet. Rose's was some building we'd explored at 300 West 57th Street. It took a minute for me to figure out that she had meant the Hearst Building. It was weird and shiny. Well, the top was. The bottom was old stone. Rose was always so exact in how she talked. When she talked about a building, she didn't say, the big one shaped like a tube of lipstick. Instead, she would say, the oval-shaped reddish-orange one at 53rd and 3rd Avenue. This girl was different, but that's nothing new. I was a little different too. I had come to realize over the past few months, how many grown kids spend all their free time building Lego cities in a dusty old storage room. Hey, Rose, I started. What makes you so different? She shrugged and slid the book across the table towards herself. I said, you like to be by yourself so much. You got a solid memory, too, real solid. Is that because you're homeschooled? You gonna build all the buildings we saw today in your sitting room? She nodded, eyes down in the book. All that from memory? I asked. She nodded again, flipping a page. I whistled. Whew, I couldn't do that, man. That's why I took pictures. I sipped the last of my orange drink. I noticed the sound of the straw slurping made her frown, so I cut it out. Rose said, still frowning, I'm not autistic. Her head jerked toward the sound of the chair legs screeching across the floor. An Asian family that had been sitting next to us was leaving. I'm not autistic, she said again. I know, you ain't got no definition, I said. She nodded and turned the page without meeting eyes with me. Well, I always feel different from everybody else, I said. Gets worse the more old I get, I think. Just between you and me, I wasn't doing too good over the holidays. I hated the holidays. I felt like I was going to die. Rose glanced at me and asked, why were you going to die? She grinned and dove back into my book. I peeked around to see if anybody was listening. Everybody else was all in their own other worlds. 2 black women dressed in short skirts sat down where the Asians had sat. I'd started to think about doing bad stuff, like how I treated you. Last October on Halloween, my brother Jermaine died. I told Rose. Actually, he didn't just die. Some thug shot him at a nightclub in the Bronx. They haven't found him yet, the dude that shot my brother, but I know he's still out there. On the street below, some fat cop was giving some delivery van a ticket. The driver was trying to talk his way out of it. The cop just walked away. I sighed. The storage room harmony, working on our 2 cities, it helps. I still think about doing bad things sometimes. I'm not completely better, but I feel like I could be better. I'm better, Rose said without taking her eyes off a pattern of architecture. She said, August 16th, my mother jumped from the top of building number 9900. Oh man, I said. All the buildings in St. Nick were 14 stories tall. I knew firsthand from sitting on top of mine flying paper airplanes. Rose, man, I'm sorry. I'm better, she said again. I thought back to last summer and remembered what she was talking about. First, the cops had tried to keep the jumper's name quiet, but soon everybody was talking about the lady who jumped. I couldn't remember her name. Desiree Green, Rose said. Yeah, I remember Rose. Oh, man. Rose's last name was different, probably her father's last name, and mostly her grandmother had raised her. She told me since her own mother had never been around. I remembered all that and everybody in St. Nick being so sad about it, and that woman killing herself like that right in our home. Rose said her mother didn't grow up in St. Nick and never really visited Rose's grandma Betty much. Man. Then, out of nowhere, she started to kick her leg back and forth with her eyes still on the floor. She told me, Rosamund, when you die, they bury you, but your soul flies to the stars. Her leg stopped. She stared back into my book. I didn't know what she had meant. What she'd said wasn't in the book. She had said the same stuff to Harp and Goalie this morning. I sat there watching her read until she said she had to go home. Her gran would get worried. As we headed towards the subway to go back to Harlem, I scoped out the tall Midtown skyscrapers one last time. The idea of falling from, or jumping from, the roof of my own building used to scare me. I couldn't help but think about what it would be like to fall from the top of one of those mile-high skyscrapers here. down towards these hard concrete sidewalks below. I wonder if that was what Rose was thinking about when she'd built her own tiny version of the same building that her mother had dove off. Rose's Lego buildings were like tombstones, I realized, a plastic cemetery of tiny skyscrapers.